Good evening. It is Thursday, September 7th, 2023 at 6 p.m. We are at the District Service Center in Cottage Grove, Minnesota. We would like to acknowledge that the land on which we gather is the land of the Minnewacan Dakota people. Minnewacan means dwellers of the Spirit Lake. Our first item on the agenda is 1.0, and that is our roll call.
Eric
Dana?
Chesmer. Here. Louise Hines is absent. Pat Driscoll. Here. Melinda Doles. Here. Katie Schwartz. Here. Simi Petniak. Sharon Van Leer.
Here. Will you please rise 2.0, the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Next is 3.0, and that is the approval of our agenda. Can I get a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved.
Moved by Simi, second by Melinda. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion is carried. Next is 4.0, and that is our workshop item. 4.1 is the bond referendum information and boundary adjustments, and that will be presented this evening by our Superintendent, Julie Nielsen.
Thank you. I think we're going to wait here for a presentation to come up, and as I'm looking at Sean, like I think the presentation is going to come up. As that's coming up, I would just like to frame around our conversation as it relates to the bond and boundary adjustments. The information that we're going to go through this evening is not our informational campaign presentation. What the board asked from administration is that prior to getting too far down the lane, that we share with the board what the anticipated boundary changes would be should question 2 not be successful. That is an effort to be transparent so that when voters go to the polls, they're making an informed decision about question 2. And so this evening, Dan Hines will be talking through the technical side of the boundary changes, and I'm going to go through some of the front loading on the front side. But really the purpose is at the end for the board to understand and for the community, anybody watching, anybody here, to understand what the impact is of question 2 not being successful. And what was shared with us from some in the community is that it was a threat by the school district. And please know that as we approach question 2 and looking at success or question 2 not passing, it really is very matter of fact. Being out in schools this week, you can see the schools that are overcrowded, and so we will need to do something. So as we take a look at the slide deck, what's on the November 7th ballot? And again, there are 2 bond questions. This is the high overview. The board is aware that we have question 1 that's focused on safety and security, the secured entryways, expansions and renovations at the secondary schools. Question 2, again, is going to be our focus for the night, specifically the elementary and the proposed middle school attendance adjustments based on those elementary schools. So question 2 addresses elementary school space at the schools projected to exceed capacity. So we'll review those schools that are expected to exceed capacity. And then also part of question 2, but not our focus tonight, is those additional bathrooms for those schools that are the 1960 schools, but that is not our purpose tonight. And then just as a reminder for the board and the community that there will be a 3rd question that is a capital projects levy question dealing with technology, safety and security as it relates to technology. So as a reminder, when we take a look back at what the community shared in terms of tax tolerance, we know that we were waffling between $10 to $11 to $12. As we look at the impact of the 2 bond questions, again, bonds are for buildings, we take a look at a median valued home, and the impact is $6 a month or annually $75. And so we will have on our website as we go through the informational campaign an actual tax calculator, but for purpose of just general, for question 1 and 2, we are looking at $6 or $75 annually. The next one just lays out the high level question 3, just so people can see that tax impact. Because that is levied a different way, that would total $3 more per month. And so all the questions are separate. We'll talk about the contingency. But if all 3 ballot questions passed, it would mean $9 per month tax increase on a median valued home. All right, so here's our focus on question 2. Question 2 addresses the elementary space at 4 of our elementary schools projected to exceed capacity. It was clear from our visits, those schools that are teetering on exceeding capacity. We could see it in their core facilities when students entered. We could see it in the cafeterias. We could see it in the gym space. And those elementary schools are Bailey, Gray Cloud, Pine Hill, and Red Rock. And I had the opportunity, and many of us around the table were out at school, so we had the opportunity to take a look at those schools from that perspective as well in terms of crowding. And then as I shared, the construction of the additional bathrooms at the 1960 school. As a reminder, question 2 is contingent on the passage of question 1. And so that means if question 1 fails, question 2 also fails. In order for us to move to question 2 and even consider it, we need to make sure that question 1 is successful. And so that got into, with the board as we talked about, that contingency. Question 2 cannot pass without the approval of question 1. So what if bond question 2 passes? Below what you're going to see is just a chart that specifically lays out, should question 2 pass, and that means should the community of Woodbury, Cottage Grove, St. Paul Park, and Newport and our townships approve bond question 2, we would be looking at the construction of classroom additions at those schools, Bailey, Gray Cloud, Red Rock, and Pine Hill. Thank you. I should have them memorized, but as it was fading away, it was slipping. It would also mean the construction of a new cafeteria and kitchenette schools that are projected to be over 700 students. And as those schools grow, you really see the impact on those core facilities. And those core facilities are the spaces that all of the students use. As I said, the cafeteria, the gym space, the common spaces, et cetera. It would mean the construction of those additional bathrooms at the 1960 schools that I believe we have had on a ballot question since 2015. And then finally, if bond question 2 passes, it would mean we have open seats at the open seats at elementary schools would increase from 1,388 to 1,843. And that is a component of transparency to know that while we're adding on at some schools, it also means that other schools, because we have 16 elementary schools across our communities, other schools would be going down. So that is kind of the trade-off. As we look to the other side, what if bond question 2 fails? And this is our focus tonight in the transparency of sharing attendance boundaries. Attendance boundary changes would occur at the elementary level for the 24-25 school year. And we actually talked about that also in relationship to our transportation, that any changes we have would be made in the fall of 2024. Crestview, Hillside, Pine Hill, Pullman, and Royal Oaks would continue with one set of bathrooms should question 2 fail. All right, bonds and boundary changes. As I just shared, there would be elementary attendance boundary changes. If bond question 1 passes and bond question 2 fails, you heard 24-25. The second bullet point is important. Middle school boundaries would be adjusted to keep elementary school cohorts together as much as possible. And what that means is based on where the students go from elementary to middle school, we have to make some slight adjustments that we will also go through with the board tonight. And we will be transparent as we go on the informational campaign about who is impacted by those middle school changes. If bond question 1 passes and 2 fails, there would be no changes to high school attendance boundaries, and we talked about that last meeting as well. Okay, Sean, I have the next slide memorized. I'm trying to think if it's Dan's slide. Dan, is it your slide? Or is it my slide? Let me look back at my actual PowerPoint because I'm going from here. You know what I'll do? I'm going to talk about the next slide that you will see, but it gets back to the boundary change guiding principles. And so what did we consider prior to even thinking about attendance boundaries as we look at our community? First of all, we want to make sure that any boundary changes that we do as a school district can last up to 8 years. We know the difficulty of transitions when elementary students are in schools for 6 years, middle schools for 3 years, and high schools for 4 years. We like to keep some continuity. So we're looking at these elementary attendance boundaries to accommodate our needs for up to 8 years and longer if possible. We wanted to make sure that the boundary plan that was drawn up, that we minimally impact families currently enrolled in South Washington County schools, that we keep those elementary cohorts together as much as possible, and as I shared, with minimal middle level boundary changes, that we lower overall enrollment at elementary schools that are currently over capacity or projected to be over capacity in the next 5 years. We work to increase enrollment at elementary schools that are significantly under capacity, and so with attendance boundary changes, that allows us to make shifts and move students into those schools where they're undercrowded. And where possible, reduce transportation costs. And so with that, when that next slide comes up, Dan Hines is going to take over. And Dan has worked with our committee. And what you're going to see first off that he's going to show is a very high level. And then he's going to zone into specific neighborhoods. We will even talk about specifically students moving from one elementary school to another school and what those impacts are. So at this time, I'm going to turn it over to our Assistant Director, Dan Hines.
Thank you, Julie. So I'm going to Vanna White it because this is incredibly difficult to follow if we just do this verbally. So lay a little bit of foundation to start with. The initial foundation is what you're going to see is you're going to see an overlay of a shaded area behind with a segmented line on top of it. And you're not going blurry vision. That really is what you're going to see. So what that is that's our attempt to best represent the existing boundaries over the top of the proposed boundaries. And so there's really not a good way to show those side by side. So the way you'll read these moving through is look at the shaded colored area as the boundaries that we're proposing. So those would be the ones that would be implemented if question 2 were to fail. The dashed lines on top of it, those are our existing boundaries. So if you follow those as a contiguous line, you'll notice that they form a shape, and that shape is the existing boundary. And as we go through area by area, I'll talk through some of those. And lastly, before we jump into these, we are working on putting up a digital calculator that parents will be able to go in, enter their address in, kind of like our attendance boundary calculator is right now on our website. And what that will show is that will show the what if scenario question 2 was to be unsuccessful. So then they'll be able to go in, find their current attendance boundaries, and then also look at where do I fall in all of this if question 2 were to be unsuccessful. We hope to have that launched in the next 2 or 3 weeks. So definitely have it up and operational by October. So the first thing I want to show you is everybody's favorite, a graph with numbers. And our graph represents 2 outcomes. The orange shaded area is open seats if question 2 passes. So that is, we build the additions that we were talking about at our stress schools, and we do not change attendance boundaries in the fall of '24. And you can see those numbers are going to be bigger because we're adding capacity to the district. Scenario number 2 on here in blue is if question 2 is unsuccessful. So that is the scenario where we move students from our schools that are feeling stress in a capacity sense into our schools that have excess capacity. So we can see that there is advantage to either. So for a net total goal of seats, we get more with Q2 passing. However, as you can see, we already have sufficient seats. They're just in the incorrect places right now from where we're seeing the growth. So this allows us to balance that out a little bit better. And we'll tackle these building by building. So how many students are we talking about? How many people are we impacting by these decisions? So this data is pulled off our students that were recorded for the 22-23 school year. It's the most solid data we have considering we're only the 3rd day into the school year. And so using last year's numbers, this is how many students would be impacted if these boundaries were implemented now. And so these are basically designed to show you moving exactly from what school to what school. And so essentially we're talking about a net total of 427 students, and that equates to roughly 300 families. So here's why I have to stand up, because in order to show this, we really need to kind of get a reference. So again, we're looking at shaded areas as the proposed final attendance boundary, and the dashed areas as the existing delineations between attendance boundaries. So what we'll do is we'll start with Woodbury Elementary, which we can see in this sort of yellow tan color. And what you can see happening here is you see this portion, which is currently portion of Newport Elementary, moving to join Woodbury Elementary. And there's 2 reasons for this. The first reason this is to boost the enrollment in Woodbury Elementary, because that's one of our schools we know we have excess capacity in. And the second reason that is to free up some space at Newport for moves we'll see moving down. And then lastly, as Julie pointed out, one of our goals in this is more than just capacity. It's really to try and create more efficient use of transportation and keeping those cohorts of students together. This particular group of students right here that go to Newport are in much closer proximity to Woodbury L, and they're also the only group of Newport Elementary students that are Woodbury High School bound. because of where they sit. So they end up breaking off later in their high school career as they move into that. And so what this would do is this would move them into that Woodbury Elementary piece, so they would then stay with that cohort through Woodbury High School. So that's piece number one. We'll move to the east, from west to east. The next piece is this small piece here, and once we get the boundary calculator up and you can really zoom into the house level, this will make more sense transportation-wise. But this particular group of homes right here currently attend Bailey, but they are, the neighborhood itself is much more designed to integrate with the Woodbury Elementary neighborhood. Also, we need to free up space at Bailey because we know Bailey Elementary is one of those schools. In fact, it was the most stressed of all of them. And so this would move a portion of those students to join Woodbury Elementary. And then again, we can go back and reference that chart. We showed exactly how many students we're talking about when we're moving these. Moving to the east again, we see this corner here that's Red Rock Elementary currently, or I'm sorry, excuse me, it would be proposed to be Red Rock Elementary. It's currently Bailey Elementary. That chunk that's sort of cut out there would move to join Red Rock Elementary, freeing more space up at Bailey again. We'll move further to the east. This particular area here, we've discussed moving that from Red Rock to Middleton many times. So Savannah Oaks is sort of how it's generically sort of known in that area. And that portion would indeed move now to become part of Middleton, which we know has far more seats than what they need looking 5 years out. Also moving a little bit south on Lake Road, or south of Lake Road along Pioneer as well. We would grab some homes that also already face Lake Middle School and Middleton that direction. So we would pull that group of students out of Red Rock, because we know Red Rock, again, is one of those schools that's stressed. So we would move those students into Middleton. And then lastly, on this particular slide, moving east again, currently this area right now around Bailey Arbor Park, that area is currently part of Liberty Ridge, and that would also move into the Middleton attendance area. Now, when I'm using these generic terms like Bailey Arbor's Park, it's important to note that we're not talking about the entire area. So that's where this boundary calculator is going to be really important in the next 3 weeks, is allowing people to see exactly why these lines are drawn the way they are and who we're talking about. So this isn't meant to incite panic of talking about large geographic areas that might encompass, hundreds of students. We're actually talking about relatively small geographic areas that just seem to make more sense and try and make the numbers work. So moving to the south, this would be the current Newport Elementary in pink. Cottage Grove Elementary is in more of this rose color, and Bailey Elementary in green. So what this proposes is moving the Newport Elementary attendance boundary to the east. It would encapsulate some of Bailey's attendance boundary, as well as Cottage Grove Elementary's attendance boundary. Now, in the case of capturing the Cottage Grove Elementary attendance boundary, about 50% of the students we anticipate capturing with that are new homes that are currently being built, and 50% are roughly the amount of students we currently already have in that neighborhood. And so this would allow us to fill Newport Elementary up to that 90 to 95% capacity that we really want to see our buildings running at efficient-wise. So then moving to the east again, multiple things going on with Cottage Grove Elementary. First, I'll talk about to the north. This would essentially capture the area south of Military Road from Bailey into Cottage Grove Elementary, as well as pushing to the east for future development. So currently this swath here, essentially from Radio Drive to 19, the mass majority of that right now is farm fields, but it is planned development for the next 10 to 20 years. And so it's getting a bit of a preemptive strike on that particular area so that it's in place, because we know that with Bailey feeling stressed today and the amount of growth that's occurring in Bailey, it's not going to be able to handle that. So we might as well just move it ahead of time. So we're not talking about capturing a ton of current students there, but more looking forward. Next up would be, again, losing this particular portion from Cottage Grove Elementary to Newport. Hawthorne Pines and Bailey Woods are the primary neighborhoods in there, as well as capturing area across the other side of Hinton, or Radio Drive if you're from the Woodbury mindset of that road. And so this would capture a portion of that Calarosa neighborhood. Now what we're trying to do is we're trying to take the stress off of Gray Cloud. So that particular group of students would be moving out of Gray Cloud and into Cottage Grove Elementary. Now again, geographically, That makes a ton of sense because Cottage Grove Elementary is essentially across the street. I think our next slide, I think we're done on that one. So in our next slide, there's really only one primary one to talk about here that we haven't yet, and that is this group here. So we're talking about the area north of 70th Street, south of 65th Street, and then we're going to be talking about to the west of Inwood and to the east of Hinton, if you kept track of that. And this particular area here surrounds Highlands Park, and that portion is currently Gray Cloud, and that would be moving to Crestview. Again, pressure coming off of Gray Cloud and boosting the enrollment at Crestview where we know we have excess seats. And then next up, we'll move to the far southern tip of our district, and we'll talk about Pine Hill. And so Pine Hill is one of these challenging sites because we know not only are we already feeling stress there, not only do we have projections that show that stress is going to increase significantly, we also have an absolutely massive amount of undeveloped land that dwarfs anything else we're talking about as far as a geographic area is concerned. And we know that it's being developed actively, and it's not particularly showing any signs of slowing down. And so what this would do is this would capture some of that undeveloped land, basically following the BNSF railroad tracks, and move that area there into Pullman Elementary. No planned developments currently on the books, but they will come someday. As well as a group of current students to the north there. It sort of looks like a softball diamond. That particular group, again, has been talked about before tonight, and that group would move into Pullman Elementary's attendance boundary. That would basically balance Pine Hill out for the foreseeable future. Because now we've captured just enough students that the school will now run back at that 90 to 95% efficiency. It will also boost Pullman up, which again is one of those schools where we know we have excess seats. And then lastly, in this region down here to the southwest, this large swath of what is blue on here now. There's a couple of things I want to say about this. First, it's a bit misleading because a significant portion along the Highway 61 corridor here is commercial property. So Renewal by Anderson, Up North Plastics, 3M, they all sort of occupy a lot of that area. What we're really talking about is we're talking about the residential areas down here along Ideal Avenue South, basically south of 100th Street. And so we have River Acres to the far south here, where we do have some students currently living. And then we also have River Oaks Golf Course and the homes that surround that area. And what this would do is this would actually pool that group of students into Armstrong, as well as hundreds of future homes that are either actively being built or soon to be built into Armstrong. We have a bit of a challenge in this particular area of the district because we have so few schools for the amount of geography we're talking about. We move north towards 80th Street and Cottage Grove, and there's schools all over the place, and we have some flexibility and movement there. Down here, we're constrained basically by Pine Hill and Armstrong. And so essentially those are our two options to take these kids to, and since Pine Hill is pressured and not going to decrease, it leaves us with Armstrong. Fortunately for us, Armstrong has excess space. So moving that cohort to Armstrong makes sense from a numbers perspective. And then lastly over here, there is a small chunk, and I am too short to point to it, but if you look to the north of the blue there where it intersects the purple, there is a small chunk there that would be moving from Armstrong to Hillside. If my memory serves me correct, I believe it is 11 students. And that's a neighborhood organization, the way that's set up. If you look at it on a street map, and again, when we get that calculator up, it'll make more sense. In order to ensure that we don't pressure Armstrong too much, we want to move some of those students out of Armstrong into Hillside, which again, is another one of those schools that has excess amounts of seats. So we bring that Armstrong enrollment into check, considering all the growth, and we increase the Hillside enrollment. And then lastly with that move is also one more chunk there where you can see the dashed line is inside the purple. That particular purple is a housing development that broke ground within the last month. And so that area there would now move into Hillside as well. So what that's doing is it's, again, allowing us not to pressure Armstrong too badly while still taking Hillside and increasing it up to a lower excess capacity, and then keeping that still one contiguous sort of boundary. So we'll jump into middle schools just for a second. I think that's where we're going next with this, because I want to show you how these two connect together. Everybody blame Sean. Oh, we're good. We're good. So how do we make sure we're not fracturing up these students now moving into middle school? And one of the things we've talked about in previous years, and we'll talk about it again this year, is that importance that we're trying to keep our elementary schools as cohorted together, if you can, moving into the middle school level. And so if bond question 1 passes, but bond question 2 fails, and these elementary school boundary adjustments take hold, we also have to make tweaks to the middle school boundaries in order that we're not creating islands of students unintentionally. So what we're talking about here is we're talking about minimizing the impact of this, and some of this is what went into the decision-making behind the actual elementary boundaries themselves. So you sort of have to look forward to how is this going to impact the middle schools before you make the elementary decisions, and they reciprocate off each other. And so with the middle school adjustments, we're talking about 41 current middle school students. We're talking about 35 students that would be moving from Cottage Grove Middle School to Oltman Middle School. And we're talking about 6 current students that would be moving from from Oltman Middle School to Cottage Grove Middle School. Now, if that number seems weird to you because Oltman's the one we're talking about is stressed out, you're not alone. But keep in mind, this is with question 1 passing. So this is assuming that Oltman Middle School is getting its addition. So we will have the ample space. And when we get to the maps, I'll show you why this actually in the long run ends up more beneficial the other way around because of the amount of new development that's being captured in this exchange. That new development that is part of the Oltman to Cottage Grove Middle outweighs the new development that's going the other way around. So even though the numbers appear inverted based on what we've been talking about stressed schools, the grand total actually isn't. Okay, same song, different verse, only we're looking at the middle schools here. Works exactly the same way. Shaded area is the proposed attendance boundary. The segmented line is the current. So, first area. This chunk will look familiar because that's the same chunk that we were moving from Gray Cloud into Cottage Grove L. And so that particular area, again, it's a portion of Calarosa, would move with the cohort of students that are going to Cottage Grove L. So that keeps that boundary that encompasses Oltman Middle School consistent so that we don't have this island of students. If we didn't do this, we would end up with an island of students there that now go to Cottage Grove L, and then they split off to Cottage Grove Middle, and the other 500 students at Cottage Grove L go to Oltman. So it's preventing that from happening. And then lastly, again, same story. This would be chasing those students that are now currently in Pine Hill that would now be going to Armstrong. And so this would move the Cottage Grove Middle School attendance boundary to the south to follow that Armstrong boundary because Pine Hill students go to Oltman and Armstrong go to Cottage Grove Middle. So in order to keep that, again, from being one of those islands that splits off, we would chase it with that boundary. Now, again, this is why I was talking about those numbers seeming weird at first, but the amount of development that's slated to occur down here or is actively occurring is going to outweigh the exchange up in the top. Because when we're talking about the Calarosa piece that we're moving, that's nearly built out. And so we're not talking about future students. So when we talk about that group of students, I think it was 35 middle school students, that's built. I mean, that is our 35 we're moving. Where the 6 that we're trading them from down here, and they primarily live in this area here, they're going to be, more like 50 or plus, and we'll get into those numbers more as we get deeper into this. But it is an exchange that is in the favor of moving more numbers to Cottage Grove Middle.
So maybe with that, as we look at this, let me just talk about next steps, and then board members, you can ask any questions. But as shared, this boundary information will be a portion and part of our informational campaign. We want to make sure that as people go to the polls, they're informed about the need to change attendance boundaries should question 2 not be successful. We will make sure that we include information in our mailing. If you recall, the district does a quarterly mailing So it will go out in there. We will work to share it with families because we have more access to our families than everybody in the community to make sure that people are aware that, again, should it not pass, this is a result in balancing those numbers across our school district. And then as Dan shared, by early October, we will have the attendance boundary calculator in place so people could actually go in and put their address in and take a look if they are impacted by an elementary attendance boundary. So with that, board members, what questions do you have for us?
Yeah, I have a couple questions. Just to start off, you talked about how the plan is hoping to last for 8 years if we have to do all these, if question 2 passes, correct? So one question I have is, if question 2 does pass, what timeline are we looking at that those boundaries would be good for?
So our goal then is very similar. It would also still be 8 years. So we're using Hazel's projections of 5 years. And we know there's cushion, if you will, built in. If you look at the amount of capacity that were suggested versus the amount of projections that Hazel is showing, we know we have some excess capacity even, in the schools that are feeling stressed. So I would anticipate that would still be very close to that 8-year mark.
Okay. And then also, in looking at 8 years, do we have, I know Hazel did some statistics with the growth, but do we know with the city planners all the developments that are going to be going up in that 8 years, or is this kind of a guess with that?
The hardest thing with that is predicting the economy, and I know that's a scapegoat answer, but it's also true. The issue with that is the city will show us their 2040 comp plan, which is the most reliable one that the cities have right now. That gives us the idea of where they're looking directionally as far as pushing with development. And then they will provide us with some guidelines on exactly how they think that's going to play out. But there's a little bit of ambiguity there to defend our cities because you don't know when a developer is going to come in and make an offer. You don't know how fast that developer is going to develop or how fast they're going to sell. And so it is difficult both for our cities and for ourselves to really hammer that down to a point of being definitive, which is exactly why we have to have leeway. It's exactly why if we need, say, 50 seats at Red Rock, as a generalization, we don't build exactly 50 seats and fill it up to 100% because there's too many unknown variables there.
One last question. Which plan, either question 2 passing or not passing, is going to be better on our transportation?
I'm nervous to answer that, mainly primarily because transportation needs to take a deeper look at exactly how that would impact. Anecdotally from Dan, not transportation, so not officially, I think some of these moves are significant enough that they would have a positive impact if the boundary change was to be implemented. Especially when you look at some of those groups of students, like the students moving from Newport to Woodbury-L, where they're just in so much closer proximity. But I would really have to defer to transportation on that one.
I think I'd also like to mention that we know as a board and as a school district, we've also had our struggles with transportation. And one of the things that we know we're going to be addressing will be taking a look at transportation. And we've had conversations already about, are we going to stick with a mile for elementary, 1.5 for middle, 2 for high school? And so that particular transportation decision also has an impact on our ability to transport. Remember, our goal with transportation is we want to make sure that we can have an efficient transportation system that's safe and that we're not canceling routes. And so we kind of began that conversation, we paused it, we want to do this long-range facility work with attendance boundaries if we need to, and then we're going to pick back up and take a look at transportation again.
Others have questions?
Yeah, Dan.
Demi?
So Dan, I had a couple questions. One is, it looks like Royal Oaks and Valley Crossing are totally untouched in this plan, correct?
Yep, that's correct.
Okay. And then in looking at Red Rock, it looks like no matter whether the question 2 passes or does not pass, their capacity is going to be roughly equivalent. Is there, whereas like all of the other schools have much larger, much more movement, I would say. And so can you help me understand why that is for Red Rock?
So Red Rock current capacity, I have 683. And then for our proposed capacity, easy for me to say,
I'm looking at the open seats chart, the number, whatever chart that is.
I got you where you're going with that. No, it's because there's two problems that we're trying to deal with. One is getting students into Middleton. And so it's a little bit of a shuffle game because they're landlocked by other schools. And so that's moving that group into Red Rock out of Bailey and then moving an even bigger group out. So it's not a wash, but it doesn't completely, eclipse as far as going from, crowded to empty or something like that.
And so, in looking at the new numbers or what the new capacities look like, so with our current buildings, our lowest capacity school is what, like around 60-ish%, right?
Yeah, I think that's pretty darn close. Yeah, 60-ish%.
And so, what would then question 2 not passing take our lowest capacity school to? Do you know offhand?
I do. I can answer that. Our lowest capacity school, if we were to perform these attendance boundary adjustments, would be Middleton per the Hazel Reinhardt report, which would be 63% still. However, I will put an anecdote on there to say that we would still need to lose nearly 300 students in the next 5 years in order for that 300 students out of Middleton specifically, in order for that number to be achieved. So I'm not going to go against Hazel and say that that's not correct, but there would be a substantial amount of students that would need to leave Middleton in the next 5 years in order for us to actually be that low. If we take that out as an outlier, the next one down would be Woodbury Elementary, and that would be at 75%.
And what is Woodbury L at now?
Currently, Woodbury L is at 68%.
Okay.
Any other questions? Okay, Eric.
Dan, you mentioned the southern part of Cottage Grove and the only 2 schools basically that are available for elementary are Pine Hill and Armstrong. With the current, I guess, rough projections, do you believe that we would need another elementary school down in that area? You mentioned that most, they're pretty dense in the northern part or north of that anyway. Do you suspect that we'll need another elementary school in that area? And I guess if so, when that roughly would that be?
Yeah, I think our chance really to do that was to build the new Pine Hill. And the issue in that particular area is availability of an actual site to put it on. It's an odd size in that it's not really big enough to add another school but leave Pine Hill alone. But it's big enough that Pine Hill can't handle it, even with additions. So it's a struggle in that area because we're in that weird space where you'd end up, say, with 2 elementary schools with 450 students, right? Because 900 kids it's a large amount of students, but it's still not enough really to justify 2 schools down there. So unfortunately, that means that there's going to be a transportation cost associated with it pretty much for the long term that I can see. It's just because of the geography.
So no matter how populated, I guess, within realistic projections, the students in that area are either going to Pine Hill or Armstrong. I mean, that's it.
And Pullman can provide some relief too, but again, that's the busing issue. But
sure.
Yeah.
Okay.
It is interesting when you drive over in that area, and we've done a number of tours, you forget how close Pine Hill and Pullman are until you drive along the lower side. You're like, oh, there's Pullman. So I know that we think of it as there's a large distance between the 2, but there really is not.
Any other questions? Okay, hearing none. Thanks, Dan.
Okay, so I'm going to actually wrap up with just a couple of slides, Sharon, because you're not done with me yet.
Oh, I'm not done with you.
Just, you know what, I've shared that our focus was getting the kids into school, and we want to celebrate this week because there's just a lot of great things happening. But just to remind the board and the community, early in-person voting begins September 22nd. Mail-in ballots, again, we will advertise the minvotes.org if people have questions. Your regular polling locations, 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. on Tuesday, November 7th, and then to find your regular polling location as well. And this will not be the only spot it's communicated. We will have multiple communications, including our mailer that goes out to every resident. You also see in-person voting, the hours, you see the locations, and then again, the minvotes.org. And so with that, that concludes our presentation. Board members, please, if you have any other follow-up conversations, but we're going to continue to work through making sure these addresses are plugged into the calculator so that when our residents go to the polls, that they know if their family might be impacted by an elementary attendance boundary or middle school attendance boundary change. Thank you.
Thank you, Julie. All right. 5.1 is the intra-district transfer and open enrollment presented this evening by our Assistant Superintendent, Kelly Jansen.
And I just want you to note that you'll see there's 3 names up there, and Kelly drew the long straw tonight to be here because the other 2 assistant superintendents are actually supervising a football game at Eastridge tonight.
And Woodbury.
Eastridge and Woodbury High Schools. So they have divided and conquered. We all spent time at TCO last week together. And so Kelly and Tyrone won, or excuse me, Kristine and Tyrone won, and Kelly is here to do our presentation. So you see 3 names, it really is only Kelly tonight. Kelly's the winner.
I think I won. All right, so we are here to provide some updates on the IDT transfer timelines, or the procedure that we put into procedure last year, and then talk about our open enrollment policy because the district does participate in that in accordance with state statute. And as you know, we try to bring items to the board in alignment with our operational plan. And so this item in particular really has to do with the far right of our strategic directions. Operations, staffing, and finance are certainly things we consider when we look at this. Along with engagement and partnerships, we want to make sure that we are partnering, especially with our district families, in providing them as much choice and option as we can, as long as we can stay within the parameters that we're going to share with you tonight. So those 2 on the right are where we go with this agenda item. So just a reminder, intra-district transfers, or IDTs, provide the opportunity for our resident families of SoWashCo schools to request to have their child attend a school outside of their assigned attendance boundary. IDTs generally are never closed. We consider every application that a family submits for an IDT. However, you heard tonight, we definitely have constraints as it relates to capacity and why we approve or can't approve IDT transfers. When we look at our IDT transfers, we look at space and staffing. We do have priority applications as determined last year as we pulled the policy and went into procedure. So we certainly look if they have current siblings enrolled. We don't want to break families up. We look at applications related to an approved achievement integration plan or process. And then we look at children of our school district staff if they are working in the building and for time reasons, transportation, whatever it may be, they have a priority application. It does not guarantee a yes for an IDT. If we get more requests than there is available space, we do have a lottery process, and it literally is a ball in it gets rolled, and we pull the numbers out and we assign them. So once a family is approved, families are responsible for providing transportation. That is not something that the district provides, so there is no impact to the cost of transportation for IDTs. And eligibility for athletic participation follows all state high school league rules as it relates to that. Something we are adding to IDTs to provide a little bit more concrete timeline for families in particular is we are going to look at 3 different times that IDTs are going to be approved, and so families can know when they're going to get that yes answer, because sometimes they submit the application and they don't know when our next meeting is or when we're going to review them. So we want to provide that information tonight. And so we will continue to have that early application. So elementary, both applications open October 15th. Elementary, that first deadline is March 1st, and decision letters are mailed by March 15th. For secondary, because schedules are created and staffing is created so much sooner, that application deadline is December 15th. And we mail those decision letters by December 22nd so that those children can register at the correct school if they are approved. We then added a spring timeline of May 3rd And then the families would know by the May 10th, those letters would be mailed. And then we added a summer timeline of August 1st as kind of that final deadline, with decision letters mailed August 9th. And you see the asterisks that unless you move into the district after that deadline, we would certainly consider that application at that point. But we've already established classes at that point. Teachers are doing assessment schedules at the elementary in particular. Our counselors aren't working until later, and so we just want to make sure that we get students off on the right foot and get them in the school as soon as we can. And so we will do a good job of communicating this with our families as well, so that they're aware. And then moving on to the board policy of open enrollment. This provides non-resident families the opportunity to attend SoWashCo schools. We do follow the Minnesota Statute Enrollment Options Program, which is 1% of the number of total students enrolled in that grade that are available for open enrollment, or the number of district resident students who attend elsewhere, whichever is lesser. So we have that many open seats in a grade level for non-resident students. And at the next board meeting, we will be bringing back a resolution that approves all of these so that we can put some parameters around our open enrollment. So it would be that the requested grade level or school is under 95% capacity, that we would consider an open enrollment. And as Julia said many times, when we accept you into our district, we're accepting you into a grade level. We're not accepting you into a specific school. However, we know that our secondary schools are fairly full. So we have not approved open enrollment for our secondary schools for quite some time. And that also goes to the second one about space being available. And then that third bullet is what I kind of touched on, that the number of available spaces per grade level is that 1% or the number of students who are enrolled elsewhere. So that timeline is set and is only one time that it's looked at. Applications are accepted from December 1st to January 15th. And then anything received after that receives a wait list. And we look at them if we don't get enough for a grade level, or if we haven't reached that number, but, and then those decision letters are mailed out by February 15th. So this has not changed since this year. For next year, we are proposing that the 4 elementary schools that you heard about tonight are closed for any new open enrollments. All of our middle schools and our 3 comprehensive high schools are closed for open enrollment. And any grade levels within those schools are at capacity of that 1% or students enrolled outside. So we do have kids who have been accepted and are moving through our system, because once they're accepted, they're ours. But any new open enrollments in those, we would not accept. And so that's an overview.
I have a couple questions.
I have a question. Hold on. We started this in with Katie.
Okay. So, first one. So we know that our middle schools and high schools are but we know that if we accept a kid in elementary, they have to go to middle and high school. So, I mean, are we considering that?
Yes, and because we participate in the open enrollment program, to accept any applications, you have to accept at least 1% or the number of students who have enrolled outside the district. You have to.
Okay.
Otherwise, there has to be a totally different process that we do to say we are closed completely to open enrollment. So with that said, last year and this year, we've really only looked at kindergartners.
Okay.
Because every other grade level has reached that threshold. So we look at open enrollment applications for kindergartners, but other than that, it's few and far between that there are open enrollment spots.
And then my next question is, when we're talking boundary changes, when we do, I mean, either one, intra-district or open enrollment, are those because I know we've said before that if you get accepted into that school, you're safe, you don't move. But it seems somewhat unfair that a child that isn't within the boundaries cannot be moved, but a child that is in the boundaries can get moved. I mean, do we look at, or is this a school district policy that we can look at that, because if we have kids currently, say at like Pine Hill, that is so full, we should be looking at those kids that are inter-district transferred or open enrolled in that school first to move out, before we move out kids that live within that geographic area.
Absolutely. And so that's one of the parameters that we look at is capacity. Elementary, it's more grade level and seats available. Secondaries, it's total capacity. So there's only exceptions made when both schools are above 95% capacity. And that is mainly for our high schools, because if we have a request from Eastridge into Park, Park is less capacity than Eastridge is over capacity. So we would accept that IDT, but from Park into Eastridge, generally those are not accepted.
But what if they're already accepted? I mean, that's my thing, is what if a child is already at, say, Pine Hill? Are we moving those kids out as a part of this boundary change if question 2 doesn't pass?
We haven't had that conversation, but
We haven't. I think what we have to remember is that once students are accepted under open enrollment, they're ours. You know, people don't go back and say, oh, this is an open enrolled kid, this is an open, that's not part of what any teacher or staff member would know, and so we haven't taken a look at that. We have had conversations about our open enrollment students as they move from elementary to middle and where those students get placed, because we want to make sure that at a time when Woodbury Middle School was overcrowded, it was difficult to make that transition from Woodbury L to Woodbury Middle. So then we suggested Oatman, or we suggested Cottage Grove Middle School, but we have not done anything with calling out, if you will, or naming students who are open enrolled, because from the school perspective, not the district, but from the school perspective, when they see students, they're just one of their own. So they wouldn't know any different. I mean, they're just treated as one of our own students. But Katie, we have not treated open enrolled students differently as it relates to attendance boundary changes, or when we do attendance boundary changes.
IDTs.
IDTs, yeah.
Isn't some of the issue also when?
Can I?
Oh, go ahead. Yeah.
Sorry. But I'm not talking about treating them, I mean, we're moving our boundary kids that are currently at that school too. So I mean, we're not treating them differently, we're treating them the same.
Yep.
We're saying you're in a different boundary for this school.
I hear what you're saying, and I think it's something we could look at.
Yeah,
What I would offer is that, remember, it's only 1% of a grade level that's, that's open enrollment. But when we look at it, we're looking at, to Julie's point, they're in our staffing projections, they're in our enrollments. So yes, something we could look at, but I think if we would pull the numbers, I think you would be surprised how many there actually is.
But I didn't think inter-district transferred, and get me wrong, Dan, they're not, when we pull the numbers, those kids are actually pulled in their boundary school, aren't they?
Not for the staffing sections.
No, when they're assigned, when they have an approved inter-district
No,
transfer.
for our numbers though, when we look at that chart and we say this many kids from this neighborhood, if some of those kids are inter-district transferred, they still show for that school, I thought, on the chart.
They should be
Because of the
coded.
household.
They should
They
be,
did, so it's
yep, they
changed
should be
now,
coded,
because the
because
last one
once they're
wasn't.
an approved IDT, so part of the lottery process is our assistant superintendents sit with student information. And so student information would then go into the full system and recode them to the school where they were approved at. So then they should be built into those numbers. And I can certainly go back and circle back with Dan and check on that.
Okay, because I know
Yep.
previous, when Mike did this, and now
Yep.
I'm aging myself
I
here.
know.
When Mike did this, it was always remember that our inter-district transfer kids are coded to the school they're supposed to be boundary to, not to the school they currently go to. So I just
Okay.
want to.
Katie, I'll follow up on that.
Okay.
But they're in the enrollment and staffing projection
Right, that I
percentages
know,
that were
yeah.
presented, yeah.
Right. That part I know. I just wondered when we were talking boundary numbers, where they fall.
Okay, next is Pat.
I was just curious to know if we use the same restrictions on open enrollment for online school.
No, online is not closed to open enrollment.
Okay.
Simi?
Katie asked my question.
Oh, Melinda?
Just wanted to ask a clarifying question with the open enrollment thing. Isn't some of the issue also about when someone's open enrolled, their family is responsible for their transportation? So if you had a kid, to answer some of Katie's question, as far as if you had a kid that we said, oh, you don't have to change for the boundaries, before the open enrollment kid, that would kind of mess up the busing unless those parents agree they're going to do that transportation.
Yep, for both approved inter-district transfers and open enrollment students, the individual families are responsible for transportation.
Eric, have anything? No? Okay. Anyone else? Are you done, Julie?
It wasn't my presentation, but Kelly, I think, is done.
I am, but we will bring it back. All
With the
three of us will
resolution.
bring it back at the next board meeting.
Okay, all right. Thank you. 5.2 is our financial update, and that will be presented this evening by our Finance and Operations Director, Dan Pyan.
Good evening, everybody. We have now moved our financial updates to the workshop, so this will be one of our first ones in this venue. So tonight we'll talk about the preliminary levy. Fall is football season, but it's also levy season, and we get to put various things into the levy and explain to you how levies work. It's a vital portion of our revenue. So as we talk in our levy speak, we talk about 2023 payable 2024 preliminary levy. So that means that the levy is set in 2023, but it's payable in 2024, and you'll learn that you won't look at the revenue until 2025. The Department of Education must produce the preliminary reports to the school districts by September 8th of 2023. Tonight is September 7th, so I do not have the numbers yet. So I'll just talk about the process a little bit. Property tax levies are made with voter approval or at the discretion of the local school board. And our local levies make up about 26% of our general fund revenues. So the state of Minnesota sets a lot of the funding things, and they set some of the levy stuff too. They set the formulas which determine the revenues. Most of the revenues are based on specific amounts per pupil. They also set the tax policies that the local schools must follow. And they also set what's called the maximized authorized property tax levy. So next time we meet, we'll be asking the board to approve the preliminary levy. And we'll probably recommend that you not approve a number. We'll ask you to approve the maximum because the state of Minnesota may make some changes in the meantime because you won't approve the final levy until December. And also we have election with 3 questions on it. And that would obviously change the levy between the time that the voters get their proposed taxes and by the time the levy is set and the tax statements go out. As I said, the district can levy less, but not more than the amount they authorized in September. The state also authorizes school boards to submit referendums for operating and capital needs to voters for approval, as we are doing this year. As a result of all the state regulations, funding is highly regulated. As you know, as I've been telling you for 10 years, and you'll hear, most of our revenue comes from the general education formula. The other 70% and then the 5% of regular, and then 25% of levies. Since 2002, 2003, the general education formula has not kept up with inflation. We do know that for this next fiscal year, an increase of 4% to the general education formula was approved, about $274 per student over previous years, the previous year. And for the next fiscal year, 24-25, an increase of 2% was approved, or about $142 over 23-24. So the per pupil allowance in 23-24 is $7,138 per student. That would need to increase about another $1,263, about 18%, to a kept pace with inflation since 02-03, resulting in an allowance of $8,126. This chart just visualizes the difference between the general education formula amount and what it would be if inflation would have been applied. We do know that after 24-25, that the formula will be based purely on inflation. Not quite purely, but pretty close. If inflation is 3% or below, it will go up by that amount. If inflation is over 3%, it will go up by 3%. We also know that our special education funding is underfunded, and according to the Minnesota Department of Education, that in FY 2020, fiscal year 2020, costs of providing programs were underfunded statewide by $591 million, and they're estimating by fiscal year 2025, the cost of providing special education services statewide will be underfunded by $806 million. They are making moves to close that gap, but it'll take a lot of money to close that gap, which the reason we bring that up with the formula is that the primary options for local school districts to bridge these gaps are to either cut regular program budgets or increase referendum revenue. Most districts have done both. And as you know, we've increased our operating referendum quite a bit in the last 10 years. As far as school district property taxes, districts may levy taxes in more than 40 different categories. We'll talk about a few of those categories so you have kind of a good idea what you'll be approving. And these maximum amounts in each category are calculated by the Department of Education, and they're set by state law or voter approval. So if the voters say you can have $2,000 per student, that's the most the board can levy for that purpose. This is just an example of the categories. These are last year's numbers because I don't have this year's numbers yet. But some of the different categories, of course, are the voter-approved operating referendums. In our case, it's $1,526 per student. And then there's also the local optional revenue, which is $724 per student. That $2,200 per student provides operating funds for our general fund. There's also levies for equity revenue, for capital projects / technology. Right now we'll be levying about $2.8 million. The board has decided to go to the taxpayers to ask if we can increase that to $5 million in future years. That one has to be approved by voters. There's also operating capital that we levy for. There's Q-Comp, safe school money, long-term facility maintenance dollars, operating lease or lease levy, as we lease some buildings for instructional purposes like we do for our transitions program. A few other levies, and then of course there's levies for community education, debt service. Debt service levies are based on voter-approved bonds, and we borrow the money and we pay the bonds by levying through the debt service fund. Just a few things to remember about the levies. Changes in tax levies does not determine a change in our budget. The levy is based on many state-determined formulas plus voter-approved referendums. Some of the increases in tax levies are revenue neutral, meaning that you may have to increase your levy in operating capital, but your operating capital levy, your operating capital revenue is capped, so they'll reduce the aid in that category, or vice versa. If the aid goes up, they can lower the levy. Our budget is limited by state-set revenue formulas, voter-approved levies, and fund balance. And an increase in school taxes does not always correlate to an increase in the budget. The reason we're having this discussion tonight and talking about levies that we'll levy at the next board meeting is because levies are set up basically on a calendar method, and that's why your final levy will be set in December. But we have to remember, for school districts, our budget year begins on July 1st. Most of the levy programs are set up for the cities and counties in which their budget year begins on January 1st. So their 2024 taxes provide revenue for the 24 calendar year budget, whereas our 24 taxes will provide revenue for the 25 fiscal year. As you know, we adopted our budget in June of 2023. Just a little bit about how property taxes work, because I know it's very fascinating to most people. It's probably just myself. But everybody that owns property pays property taxes to various jurisdictions. Everybody that lives in Washington County will pay property taxes to Washington County. Everybody that lives in Washington County also live in either a city or a township. Somebody lives somewhere. So they're going to pay taxes to the city or the township. And of course, some of our county is broken off into different school districts. So the ones in our school district, they'll pay to our school district. There might be people that live in Washington County that pay to Stillwater, that pay to North St. Paul, that pay to Forest Lake. There's also special taxing districts. You probably see it on your bills, and that's for like watershed revenue sources. We also have to remember that you may pay taxes to the city of Woodbury, but then pay your school district taxes to Stillwater. Each jurisdiction, as our school district, sets its own tax levy based on limits in state law. The county will send the bills out, collect taxes, and then they'll distribute the funds back to us. Just a quick primer on what happens with our levies and with property values. So as we look at our levy as a pie, obviously, as illustrated, a higher market value, and we'll talk about market values when I get the reports out at the next board meeting. That means that you're going to have a bigger slice of the levy pie. If you have a lower market value increase, you'll be paying a smaller slice of the levy pie. The levy isn't going to change based on the market values. So it's not like if a house goes up, we're going to get more. We might get more money from that house, but some other house will pay us less money. It's illustrated a little better on the next one. So we have property valuations. We have 2 properties in the district. They're each worth $100,000, and the levy, say, is $500. Each property will pay $250 of levy. It's pretty easy to understand. Now, if the orange house goes up by 10%, and the blue house goes up by 25%, we're still asking for the same amount of levy of $500. We're still going to get the same amount of money, but the orange house will now pay less, and the blue house will now pay more. It does not, the increase in the blue house does not give the district more money. It just redistributes the money the district is asking for. So what's going to happen next? We'll get those levy reports tomorrow, we hope. Chris Blackburn and I will attend the tax levy workshop and listen as the state goes over every line, about 2,000 lines of code. We will audit every levy that we have to make sure that it's correct, and if there's issues with it, we call the state and they look it up and they usually fix it. The board will approve the 23 paid 2024 preliminary levy at its September 21st meeting. If the results of the bond election would update the levy, obviously. The results of the capital projects levy vote will update the levy, obviously. And by then, the school board will know what the final levies are, and they'll pass those in December. At the same time, we'll have the truth and taxation hearing.
Dan, the money that we're gonna, or the levy report that the Department of Education will release this week or tomorrow, that's the one, so if I'm remembering correctly, like last year, they told us we could levy an additional like $700,000 or $800,000 or something like that. Is that the one, is that what this one report that they're issuing is? I realize you may not know what goes on in my brain, but it's like it's the one that is, it's a relatively small number in the context of our overall budget, correct? Like the increase or the decrease?
The levy report will have our total levy, which is about $100 million.
Oh, okay, so then.
Including the debt service, community ed, and.
Okay. But the increase or decrease is a relatively small amount year over, or it won't be because of the new legislation?
Yeah, the increase or decrease in the total amount is calculated just with straight math. So if it goes up for whatever reason, increase in pupil units, say, you know, we have a per pupil amount for our operating levy, which is most of the general fund levy. And if our pupil units go up, that levy is going to go up because it just multiplies it by the number of students.
And so are they basing that on then the number of our weighted ADMs from last school year then? Or do they?
They base it on projections that we submit.
Okay.
And then once a year is done, then they true them up. So they say, oh, Dan projected you to have 30,000. No, you only had 20, so we're going to take away, you know, yeah, $30 million. We don't try not to project them that high, but you know, we put projections into the state that are pretty reasonable. So that amount, that total amount, generally will probably show, you know, a 5% increase, whatever. So that's 5% of the $100 million.
Okay.
That will not have any reflection of a new bond. It will not have any reflection of capital projects levy increase because we won't know, obviously. But it gives it a good idea what we levy for.
So then what we approve in December is this whatever percentage increase or not increase that the state tells us, correct? And then we have to do we make a separate approval based on what the?
No, by that time we'll know the results, so they'll
Okay, so
have
it's
the
just one
numbers
big
figured
thing.
in.
Okay.
It's just that unfortunately they have to send out proposed property tax notices at the end of November.
So that's sent out before the results of the election have been
Yes.
calculated.
And then they put a note on there, and the election may change this. But we'll know by the board meeting, you know, what the impact is on the houses and things like that. Yeah.
Anyone else? Okay,
Thank you.
you're welcome, Dan. Next is 5.3, and this is the first reading of proposed policy changes, and that will be shared this evening by our Superintendent, Julie Nielsen.
Thank you. The following 6 policies have been reviewed and revised to reflect updates in the Minnesota statutes, definition of terms, legal references, and cross-references. Our board policy committee took a look at these policies and reviewed them with the appropriate administrators. And so this evening I'm bringing forward for a first reading 6 policies. 510.1 athletic and activity participation. For that particular one, there were no suggested changes in its existence. 510.2 athletic and activity scholarship or scholastic eligibility, keeping in mind that one deals with making satisfactory progress, student grades. There were no suggested changes there. 510.3 athletic and activity fee schedules. In there, you will note there's an updated yearly maximum fee and a reference to page 2 and 3 that outlines 2 additional fees. I believe it was $70 for 2 different programs. Let me see. Fall dance line, $70, competitive cheer, $70, and the adjustment, a yearly maximum of $535 for a family is in effect through the Minnesota State High School League. 510.4 athletic and activity field trips, and that just really lays out the approval process for field trips. There were no proposed changes with that policy. 903.1 is a student teaching and internship policy, and the recommendation is to remove that policy. That policy is actually in statute as it relates to bringing student teachers in, working with human resources, and how universities get approved to have student teachers in our school districts. So the recommendation from the policy committee is to remove 903.1 because it is covered by statute. 908, school and community relations, there are just a couple of minor grammatical changes that are being recommended at this time. And so with that, board policy committee review members, any board members have any questions?
None? Okay. Seeing none, at this time, individuals had the opportunity to sign up on public comment on the policies only. Dana, did anyone sign up? Okay, thank you. We now move into 6.0, and those are reports and comments. School district committees, reports on school district on the committees. As a board member, this is your opportunity to share information on any meeting you attended after that last board meeting. So I will start with
You want me to start, Sharon? You want me to start with my superintendent update? You can skip over me. I can go last. I mean, you're so excited to get this meeting over. I'm like, And I know I've talked twice or 3 or 4 times already, but
It was.
can I interject and say, do you want to hear my update?
Scratch what I just said. Go
No,
ahead,
you're going to
girl.
not have to repeat that, but we're actually going to start out with just a quick video clip from our opening day.
Go ahead,
Sharon,
girl.
it's all good. Here we go.
Okay, share with us. Oh, that was worth the wait.
Thank you. There is, I will just say, what has it been, 31 years, 32 years, there is something so special about the opening day. And the little friend you saw me with, well, he was not happy. He was a kindergartner starting his first day, and he had some tears in his eyes, and we connected over Donatello. I know nothing about the Ninja Turtles, except he had a backpack and a jacket, and so that was how I connected with him. And he shared with me he liked the purple one. I don't know who the purple one is, but what I did do is I did a little research quickly, and I figured out it was Donatello. And so in that particular photo, I said, "Can you smile for the camera?" And he just smiled a little. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the first day, and then I'll rewind because there's some excitement out there. Our executive cabinet and district leaders were out and about, and you could see that photos were taken across the entire school district. At Red Rock Elementary School, as you saw that photo come up, it was a perfect photo op for the red carpet. So students walked in and were entered with a red carpet, lots of pictures being taken. At Middleton, it gave me pause because many of our leaders who were out there, Abby, I think you mentioned this too, a couple other leaders mentioned this who were out, but if you've never been a kindergarten teacher, you just don't know. And to see a commons filled with parents and grandparents dropping off their kids, and to see kindergartners in line, and you watch the experience of our teachers and how they take the crier or they take the one that is a little hesitant and they wrap them in and they connect with them, and there is a true beauty. And that is an art that only our primary teachers have. And what I would say as I watched our teachers swoop those kids in and put them in line and then parade off, I could see from the people visiting that unconditional love. As they walked out the door, I saw a lot of tears. And so in that moment, you know that there's a lot of trust placed in and on us as educators. I will say from that experience, again, I was reminded of how old I'm getting as a grandparent dropped her granddaughter off, and I happened to have her son. And so there was a big hug as we greeted. I thought, oh my gosh, I still know people. But just such excitement, pictures being taken. At Valley Crossing, as I headed there, the kitchen staff was busy preparing meals, making sure that they got it right the first day, because not knowing how many kids were going to eat lunch. They had 600 walking tacos, 200 sandwiches, and Jenny was sure to have enough. And she said, we're gonna make it work. And then interesting, at Valley Crossing, they do VNN, Valley News Network, I believe is how it's referenced. But Kana, the principal, was on TV in the classrooms. And as she was on TV, we were also walking around. And we stepped into a classroom, and a little boy noticed she had the same dress on that she had on TV. And he's like, there she is, she's on TV, there she is. Like, how could she be on TV, and how could she be in my classroom? It was recorded earlier. But nonetheless, kindergarten, at Liberty Ridge, I was in a kindergarten classroom. Maybe I'm just attracted to kindergarten. Maybe I just care just about those little ones. I was in a kindergarten classroom, and they were playing dominoes, and of course, one student hit the dominoes over before it was time. Like, why'd you do that? And then it was time to clean up, and nobody wanted to clean up, but the teacher rushed in and said, you know what? Would you like to have time later today? And they were like, yes! So, they moved right on. They picked up, and they knew they had more time coming to play. And it was also the reminder that at that young age, kids like to play. They're transitioning from summer, and we want to make sure we give them enough playtime. Also teaching of routines, how do you stop the class? How do we move on? How do we transition from one location to the next? All things that we think students come in with, and they just don't. And then Great Cloud Elementary School, it was lunchtime. And hats off to our nutrition services staff. We've got the walking taco. That means we've got chips, meat, cheese, sour cream happening on the first day. And our nutrition services staff, our leadership at the school level, our kids just did a tremendous job. But really hats off. The nutrition services staff was so incredibly positive as they greeted students. And then of course there's knowing your PIN numbers and scanning your numbers. So just a lot of things. And as I've always shared, making sure kids get into school safe, making sure they have lunch, and making sure they get home safely. That is a successful first day, and we certainly did that. I'm going to just rewind just a little bit just to talk about our first day back, Tuesday, September 5th. We had 6th and 9th graders. So there was one picture from Woodbury Elementary School that you saw. The hall was maybe a little bit sparse. I was at Woodbury Middle School the first morning, and I thought there was something wrong with the 6th graders. They walked into the cafeteria, and that's where they were directed, and they all sat down, and not one of them spoke a word. I thought, this is a different kind of class. They're just not going to talk. And then I realized they were all really scared. Because 10 minutes later, they got together in the gym, and they were loud as they've ever been. But just that onboarding of 6th graders and 9th graders, I would share the same. There was a quiet. We had student leaders, our web and our link leaders, directing students. And it's amazing how students respond to other student leaders. It's just so much more powerful. And I know I see some shaking of heads. Some of your children have been part of that group, but just really, really powerful. And then if I back up one more step, we had our all-staff welcome back on Tuesday of workshop week, where we welcomed back 3,500 employees. We had 8 students speak, keeping in mind that students included alumni as well as existing student. We had a teacher who was a parent who also was a student speak. It was just a great morning, and the weather could not have been more beautiful. We had our district band perform. And the board is also aware that our opening is Be Amazing, and so our focus as our students spoke was on being amazing. High five to an amazing school year, and the high five really outlines our 5 core values of connections, integrity, equity, innovation, and excellence. Hopefully I got all 5 of those. I really have been working on those, snapping those off. Now I'm going to fast forward. Our highest first day ever for lunches. Yesterday, we served 12,300. 12,300 lunches, and today, Dan shared that we surpassed 1,300 lunches. And it's important to keep in mind with those numbers of surpassing all lunches previously is we have a number of students who I know, particularly at the elementary level, who still bring lunches from home. I think in anticipation of long lines and having to wait, it's just kind of one thing that we can take the stress off of some of our students. And so we would anticipate that those lunch numbers going even higher. But our nutrition services staff, as I shared, super positive across the district and really making it happen for our kids. Next, our enrollment. To date, I always like to put a date stamp on it, Dan, so what time do we meet today? 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock? 18,834, and so at this point, we are at the highest number of students enrolled in South Washington County schools. We do, as always, we expect some fluctuation in numbers. It's just that time of the year, but we are very pleased with where we're at today. And then finally, once we get over this week of being excited and people overload and kid overload, we are going to swing our attention then to our informational campaign to make sure that our community is prepared for next steps and completely informed about the bond on November 7th. With that, thank you for allowing me to speak, Sharon.
Oh, you're welcome. So I'm going to take the liberty and act like I never did the other one. Next, we will take school board members' reports, okay? This is an opportunity for board members to provide information on meetings that they attended. That was pretty good. Okay. Now we'll begin with Melinda.
I just want to first off say that the back-to-school event was amazing. So the Be Amazing really fit with that event as well. So my report, obviously, Julie's already talked about the policies, and I attended the policy review committee meeting. And then for the 916 board, There were 65 new students that were enrolled in the Setting 4 program there, and 3 of the programs there have no wait list right now, and 2 of them have a wait list, and that's because they are short-staffed, like all over. And then we approved the strategic action benchmarks at the last meeting, and we have a retreat coming up on the 27th.
Thanks, Melinda. Pat?
I didn't attend a meeting because they sent out a notice the meeting's canceled due to a lack of agenda items. That's never happened to me before.
Okay, Simi?
Julie talked about policy. None of my other committees have met since we last saw each other, but I know CFAC and the DEI Parent Advisory Committee start up back up next week, so I'm looking forward to that. I'm also, as a parent, extraordinarily grateful that school has restarted, so thank you to any educator out there.
Katie? Eric, you and I are at the end, so Eric, you go first.
I'll let you add.
Okay. The only thing is that it was a tremendous back-to-school event, and of course, yours truly, you know, it was really a good event because I was there. I just want you to know. And the other thing I did is I took my great-granddaughter to school, and I cried. So I was one of those parents. So that's it. So, and now we can continue on with the business. 7.0 are our future meeting dates. We have a school board business meeting on September 21st, 2023, and a workshop board meeting on October 5th, 2023. Board meetings will be held here at the District Service Center at 6 p.m. And with that, we are at 8.0, and we are adjourned.